welcome to Hidden Behind the Music Stand. I'm your host, Patty Ryan, and with me is Emily Levin, who is the principal harpist with the Dallas Symphony Orchestra and on faculty at Southern Methodist University and the Aspen Music Festival. She is the founder of Groundworks, a harp-centric American commissioning project and an internationally award-winning harpist. Her musical projects focus on the importance of play, the role of creativity and community, and strengthening the connection between audiences and performers. And today we'll be talking about just that. Welcome, Emily. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So we go back to, I think you were reminding me that it was 2015, and
Yes.
I was visiting Tanglewood post my era there to visit friends, and I must have been in the area. I went past Tanglewood, and I was meeting with my friend Annabelle Taub, who is also a fantastic harpist, and she was like, oh, you should meet Emily. And I felt immediately your warmth and friendliness, and I was like, okay, this is a good person. So...
Oh, thank you.
And then, flash forward a little bit, our paths crossed again in a more professional setting where we performed with each other as part of your curated concert with the Lakes Area Music Festival. And yeah, it was amazing to play, Henriette, what's her last name?
Henriette Renier's trio, which
wow,
I would
I
just
said
like
it really
to say.
poorly.
No, it's because she's a harp composer.
Yeah.
No one knows who she is yet.
It's a pretty cool piece. It's a great piece.
Yeah.
It's hard, seems like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. She was a very intense, very serious woman, and her music is some of the hardest stuff that we have, but it's so much fun to play.
Yeah.
But you were great because the violinist and I had played the piece before.
Yeah.
And we had a rehearsal the day of because of the schedule conflict.
Right.
And you showed up. We put this piece together in 2 rehearsals.
Yeah.
And then our concerts were awesome.
Yeah.
It was so fun.
It was a lot of fun. That was Julia Choi, too, that we played with. Yeah, and so, of course, just every now and then kept in touch with you. And so I'm just really grateful that you're here today to share your story a bit.
I was so excited when I got your message because I love podcasts.
Awesome, yeah.
And I was like, oh, this will be so much fun.
Yeah,
And it's such a cool concept. I feel like musicians are such a weird idea to the outside world.
Yes.
It's nice to sort of show that we are our own odd, quirky individuals, too.
Yeah. Speaking of the outside world. I just want to briefly touch on this because I know that it's one of those things where it's like, okay, don't talk about politics. However, this is history. So, it was about a day and a half ago where the election happened when we're recording. And I just want to briefly tap into the sentiment and feeling right now of a second Trump presidency and how this is A, uncharted territory for America, but B, for musicians is going to be a really important time for us to activate, or I'd like to believe that we have a power to fight back in some way. And I mean, for those listeners who are Trump supporters, of course we need to be able to have a discourse with you about this. It's one of those things where it's like, I have my opinions and feelings, but I'm really nervous for what's going to happen next.
And I think because I grew up in a pretty conservative world, and my personal views have changed as I've gotten older and wiser, but I still have people in my life who I love. We disagree on political things. I think it's very important to have political disagreements, and despite the fact that I do think I'm always right, I know I'm not.
I share that.
But we like to say it's a Levin family trait. My immediate family, we're all wonderful, weird people, but our united feature amongst the 4 of us is we all think we're right. I think my dad is the most easygoing out of the 4 of us, but we're all like, no. Anyway, all that to say, I just find it so sad that we're at a point in our country's history where the candidate for the Conservative Party is a rapist and a felon. I find that morally reprehensible and disgusting.
Yep.
And I really think that you could have done better. And I think it's a shame that that's who the supposedly moral party has decided to align themselves with.
Yeah.
And I think you should do a better job.
Yeah, well said. I mean, there's going to be so much data follow, and there's already so much reaction, and how did this happen? What does this say about not just politics in America, but politics globally, as we see more and more of this kind of politician in other European countries? But yeah, let's just buckle our seatbelts. And that's where I say, for me, I feel a very strong urge to channel that, not just through this podcast and having a platform to speak about these things, but also through what we do in our teaching, what we do in our performance, how we engage with our audiences, what we program, a variety of those things that are incredibly important tools for us as artists.
Yes. I think the rhetoric now, and it was augmented by the pandemic, people are so isolated now. You see a lack of curiosity about others. You see a lack of ability to actually have conversations with even friends. In general, I think people are not as connected as they used to be, which is so ironic because we live in a hyper-connected world, but I think that's actually done a lot of harm. But I think the special thing about what we do is our job is to make experiences for people.
Right.
We're like an elevated form of entertainment. And now it's more important than ever to be able to bring people together and remind people that it's important to be kind, it's important to be intelligent, it's important to be understanding, and it's important to treat other people the way you would want to be treated.
Right. As we just sit here. Yeah, it's like, is that too much to ask? But maybe it is. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see how things go. Maybe it's not as worst case scenario as we're thinking. But yeah, well, thank you for sharing some of your thoughts with me. It's also helpful to like air some of this out together. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, with that in mind, would you like to answer some Spitfire questions?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Favorite piece to perform?
Ooh. Okay, I have two answers. Orchestra, Mahler 4, Mahler's 4th Symphony. Solo, Debussy's Dances, Sacré and Profane. It's for harp and string quartet or string orchestra. And it's really an incredible piece that you get to grow with as you get older. And I've started to notice that. So it's cool. I can feel the journey every time I play it.
Yeah. I have a standing history with this piece too, because I've played it actually twice at Tanglewood with some fantastic harpists. One was Annabelle, and the second was Julia.
Yep, Cornelli.
Yes.
Both awesome people and harpists.
Yeah. Yeah, the first time with Julia, we played it as a string quartet, and the second time with Annabelle was with, like, string orchestra. Yeah, so I know that piece pretty well. And it was originally composed for a chromatic harp, or something along those lines, right? Yeah.
Exactly. No, if you can imagine two sets of strings crossed in an X shape, the harp's problem for a very long time was they couldn't figure out how to get the ability to raise the pitch of the string. So on a piano, the black keys, you can create a full chromatic scale. But with the harp, because the strings are pre-tuned to a specific pitch, we started out with crochet hooks that would physically pull the string up a half step. Then they learned how to do that same effect with pedals. But it took them so long to be able to figure out how to make a mechanism that does flat, natural, and sharp. And so around the turn of the 20th century, Pleyel had come out with its chromatic harp, which was like, we don't need mechanism, we'll just use more strings. And then Erard came out with its double action pedal harp, which is what we use today.
Yeah.
But Debussy, being the wily person that he was, specifically wrote his piece to be played on the chromatic harp or the double action pedal harp.
Oh, wait, did he write like kind of like two versions? Or, you know, like...
He wrote, if I remember correctly, he wrote for harp chromatique or with pedals.
Okay. I mean, no one plays it on the chromatic harp anymore anyway, because they don't even exist, right? Or do they? I don't know.
They do exist, and some people, I think like more period instrumentalists will do that, but they're so complicated.
Yeah. And
don't get me started on the triple strung harp.
And I assume you've never played, or I don't know, maybe I'm assuming wrong, but have you ever played a chromatic harp? Yeah, okay.
I have not.
Yeah. No interest. Like there's just no, yeah.
There is curiosity, but I feel like it's hard enough to play my own instrument.
Yeah, fair enough.
They do make these harps that are triple strung. They're older harps. They're used for more period pieces. I have a friend in Canada who plays a triple strung harp, and it's amazing. It's so, so cool. But that I'd be curious to do a lesson on, just so I can see what it's like.
So the triple strung these are things I'm assuming, is it similar to a piano where the hammer will strike 3 strings, but instead you have to pull 3 strings to get the same pitch? Or
so if I remember correctly, I saw it once at Gale. It's 2 sets of strings, and then there's a third one in the middle, and I believe the one in the middle is the accidental. So, and you have to play all 3 of these strings. So like you'll play the 2 normal ones, and then if it's like a C minor scale, so a C, a D, and an E flat, I believe the E flat comes in that middle, like tucked away set of strings.
Oh.
It's extremely complicated.
Wow.
And this might be wrong. It's been about 10 years since I've seen one.
Dang. Yeah, that sounds complicated.
But people play it and it's so cool.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can find a video of my friend Antoine playing it.
Yeah, that'd be awesome to share. Favorite piece to hear live?
Oh, I think Brahms' Second Symphony.
That's a good one. Yeah. First piece that got you interested in classical music and your instrument?
I think I would say it was the first piece I played in youth orchestra. And like, I started harp when I was 5, but that's because I was enthralled by the sound. And I listened to classical music, but the first time I really appreciated it and was like, this is such a cool experience, was playing Bartok Concerto for Orchestra in my youth orchestra.
Oh my God.
And I was 12 years old. I remember coming out of one rehearsal and being like, oh, I think I need to watch the conductor, but I also have to listen because not everyone is playing exactly at the same time.
Yes. Isn't that still a problem?
It's still a problem, but it's like, that's a core memory. I remember first becoming aware of the fact that you had to use your eyes and your ears, but that piece is extraordinary. Mm-hmm. And one of the amazing things about a youth orchestra is you spend 3 months preparing, or at least we did. We had months of rehearsals because you only rehearse once a week, but you get to know the piece so well. It was that sort of sparked my love of playing in orchestra.
Yeah. And that's like one that is really good to have under your belt at such a young age. Yeah.
I am so thankful every time we play it.
Yeah.
It feels so familiar to me. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Denver Young Artists Orchestra.
Yeah. Latest piece or composer you're obsessed with?
Okay, this is because I had to be, but we just finished doing the Ring Cycle of Richard Wagner, and I had only played Valkyrie before this experience. And so, for those who are not Wagner superfans, these are 4 operas. It's about 18 hours of music. It's basically the Lord of the Rings, but with music. And I spent a lot of time listening and studying and preparing. And while I am not a Wagner fan, I will say there are some moments that are absolutely incredible. So good. The introduction to Götterdämmerung, which is a 40-minute long introduction, has just unbelievable music. It's so beautiful. So that's who I've been spending a lot of time listening to.
And I kind of knew that this was through Dallas Opera that was doing the
Dallas Symphony.
Oh, and Dallas. So wait, both or?
Nope. The Dallas Symphony's music director is Fabio Luisi, who is an amazing conductor, but he's an unbelievable opera conductor. He was principal conductor at the Met for 10 years. He just finished his time with Zurich, but he started his career as a rehearsal pianist.
I see.
And so it's really what he does extraordinarily well. And so I think 2 years ago, they announced that we were going to do the complete Ring Cycle in a semi-staged version, so a concert format.
Gotcha.
I think we're the first American orchestra to do this. And so it was a lot of preparation because we're not an opera orchestra. We haven't played. The only reason we've played Valkyrie is because conductors like to do it in concert format.
Yeah.
But so for everybody, it was really a Herculean undertaking to learn 18 hours of music that you've never played before.
Yeah.
But he is really amazing. He knows every single singer's line. If someone didn't come in correctly, he would start singing their part for them. It was so cool to watch. It was someone who had spent decades learning this music. It was very inspiring.
Yeah. Was the orchestra reduced at all?
No.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow.
We had 6 harps, 20 Wagner tubas, 12 anvils. Like so many things.
Wow. And now I'm like, I wish I was there to see it because that's like a once in a century, probably. Yeah. Unless it becomes a thing.
It was pretty epic.
Yeah. Wow.
And it was very fun.
Well, congratulations. I know that is such an undertaking. That is like, it's one of those things that I feel like a lot of musicians either get the chance to do it or not, but like it's one of those.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a huge project.
I didn't know it was on my bucket list, but now I'm going to cross it off my bucket list.
Yeah, exactly.
Good job, me.
Yeah. Alternative musical instrument.
Oh, the cello.
Oh, okay, well.
I took, when I was 4 and telling my parents that I wanted to play the harp, my mom had signed me up for cello lessons, but there was a waiting list for the studio. And so for a year, she tried to get me to be interested in the cello. And I was like, no, I want to play the harp. And then when I was in undergrad at Indiana University, one of the amazing things that they do there is you can take secondary lessons on a different instrument. And so I signed up for cello lessons. And my teacher, who was also my friend, I showed up to my first lesson and I was like, I want to play the swan.
Sure.
And he was very grumpy. And he said, well, you can play the swan when you can play with vibrato. And you can play with vibrato when you can play in tune.
Oof.
And so I spent the rest of the semester not really practicing because I was a history major and didn't have time to learn the cello.
Yeah.
But I was very enthusiastic nonetheless. But it's really hard when you have good ears and you can hear how things don't sound good, but you haven't spent the time to fix them.
Yeah.
That was my relationship with the cello.
Yeah, okay. You know, it's funny because I've had the reverse situation. Like, I elected to take harp when I was in undergrad. So,
oh, amazing.
Yeah, so I can kind of like, I learned honestly so much about pizzicato from my harp.
Yes.
Yeah, and I talk about it a lot with my students about how, because I love teaching pizzicato, is like this thing, which I'm demonstrating, it's what I call the retraction of the fingers into the palm. A lot of times string players will like do some weird like trigger thing.
Yep.
But it's like, no, it's actually a whole thing from, anyway, it was very enlightening. And, you know, I also remember it being kind of this weird association when I like sat down to perform at the end of this class that I was taking in undergrad, and like my fingers were getting sweaty again, because even though I'm so used to performing, it was like, oh my God, how does this work? Am I going to mess up?
It's really scary. I actually think it's so important to learn things as adults.
Yeah.
Because when you're in school, you're always learning new things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard. Like, your brain has to go through that experience of not knowing how something works.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, it is scary.
Yeah.
My end of semester cello jury was for Peter Stumpf. And
Sorry.
And I was like,
he's a nice man,
I'm pretty sure he was nice. At the end, I think I reminded him that I was actually a harp major. And I think I was like, and I play the harp much better than I play the cello.
Well, you made it through Spitfire questions. Congratulations.
Yay. Thank you.
Now it's the time to talk about how you got to the harp, how you decided to become a professional, and where you've taken it since.
Cool. I was born. No, just kidding.
In the year. No.
Yes. It was a dark and stormy night.
Yeah, exactly.
So I grew up in Colorado, and my parents both loved music, but they weren't musicians. And my mom especially always wanted to take instrument lessons when she was growing up, and she wasn't able to. And so it was important to her that her kids be able to play an instrument. And so she had always loved the cello. And so she signed me up to take cello lessons with a local Suzuki teacher. But there was a waiting list, so I was on the waiting list. And my dad would always tell me stories before I went to bed. It was our nightly tradition. And he just happened to be telling me the story of Old Testament David playing the harp for Saul. And little 4-year-old Emily was like, the harp. And so I went to my mom and I was like, I am going to play the harp. And she was like, no, you're going to play the cello. But I, to this day, am very stubborn. And I was back then too. And so according to my mom, this went on for a year. She would take me to instrument petting zoos and be like, here's the cello, isn't it great? We would go to orchestra concerts and she would point out the cello. And the entire time I would be sitting there saying, but when do I get to play the harp?
Right.
And so finally she called a local music store that sold instruments, including harps, Klasny Music, which just closed in Denver after almost 100 years of being in business.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah. She called Dave Klasny and said, my daughter wants to play the harp. What do you do with that? Like, where do you find a teacher? Because, this is in the mid-90s. We didn't have, to this day, people don't know where to find harp teachers.
Sure.
But Dave connected my mom with Mary Kay Waddington, who actually started the Suzuki method for the harp. She went to Japan and studied with Dr. Suzuki many years before that. So I started lessons when I was 5. And for a long time, I would always say that I wanted to be a harpist and something else. I always loved it, but I was very interested in many things. And I don't like commitment. I like to keep my options open. So I would always say harp and something. And as an 8-year-old, I was like, I'm going to be a harpist and an ice skater.
Right.
And that went very badly. But that continued up until college, and I chose Indiana University because I was worried that a conservatory would be too stifling. It was between IU and Juilliard, and I talked to the teacher at Juilliard, who I had known for several years at this point, just being like, what should I do? And she was like, well, it's always here. Like, this is not a one and done. You can always audition again for masters. And so I decided to go to IU, and I was a harp major and a history major. And I loved IU. I loved my harp studio. My teacher, Miss McDonald, was just a wonderful person who taught me how to be like the best harpist I could be. But I felt so fulfilled. My history classes were challenging and used all of that side of my brain. And when I found myself exhausted of reading thick historical documents, I would go and practice and it would use the other side of my brain. And when I got tired of practicing, I could go back to that. It was a place where I felt so supported to do as many things as I wanted. And by the end of my 4 years there, I was writing my honors history thesis on the war songs of the French Revolution. And I was so stressed and so tired. And I was like, I just want to play music. And so then I did my master's at Juilliard with Nancy, who I call my forever teacher. I love her. And I had just started the doctoral program there. I was 2 months into the program when I auditioned for the Dallas Symphony and won. And then there's this very long story that I won't get into about me attempting to finish my doctorate because it was only 2 years of coursework.
I see.
And I was ahead of my time in asking to do a year's work remotely and go back and forth.
Was this during the pandemic, or this was just like a...
No, it was 2016.
Okay.
Yeah, my request was immediately denied. But,
worth a shot.
So I dropped... Yeah. I actually dropped out of the program, and I started my job in fall of 2016.
And you've been there since?
I've been there since.
Yeah.
And I had no idea what to expect when I moved to Texas. I had never been there. And the orchestra is amazing. My closest friends come from the DSO. The level of music making is great. People are nice. Like, I walked into a Best Buy when I had just moved there from New York, and I was trying to figure out which router to buy for my internet. And this random person who doesn't work there comes up to me and is like, "Oh, do you need help?" And I was from New York, and I was like, "Don't talk to me."
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
And then I realized that they actually were trying to help.
Yeah.
And then they did help, and they helped me choose the correct router. And that was my first experience with people in Texas just being open and friendly and being like, "Can I help you? I will."
Yeah, Texas, I was going to say it's like that's the Southern charm, but it's like Texas is a little different than other parts of the South with that sort of Southern charm. Yeah.
I find people in Texas to be extremely genuine most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people are not stereotypes, but in my experience, the vast majority of people who I live and work with are wonderful, open people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, someone moves in, they're like, "Oh, come out to dinner, let's go here,
Right.
let's do this." It's like
Mm-hmm.
you're already a part of a community. And I find that great.
Yeah.
And the food and beverage scene here is amazing.
Yeah.
The only thing lacking really is nature.
Well,
and having grown up in Colorado, it's
Yeah.
really extremely flat.
Totally. I remember having that kind of shock as well when I moved to Houston, because I was just like, everything's pavement and concrete. Like, where are mountains? They're not here. Yeah.
And it's really hard to walk places. That's my other complaint.
Yeah.
Like, it's so much a driving place.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Anything upcoming that you're looking forward to?
With the DSO, I'm doing a concerto in April, which I'm super excited about. Actually, by Renier, the Renier Concerto.
Oh, okay. Amazing.
Yeah. And then I will say one of the amazing things about where I am and the success I had in competitions earlier is that I get to do a lot of performances outside of orchestra. And so between chamber music and commissioning and solo stuff, it keeps my schedule very busy. But I have two things that I'm super excited about. The first is a new music commissioning project called Groundworks, which we can go into it more later if you want. But it commissions harp-centric works from American composers. And it's one composer from each state and Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. And the piece premieres in the hometown of the composer.
Awesome.
And it came about because whenever I go back to Colorado, I reconnect with people from my childhood all the way up through the present who are just so excited to see what I've been up to musically and what's happening in my life. And I realized for composers, you know, they're so transient. They move wherever they need to for the job. And it's really nice to bring them back to those first places that supported them. So it's really about going back to community and going back to celebrating the places where we were first felt supported as artists.
Totally.
So the next one is happening in just less than a year. Commission is for fall of 2025. It's Kareem Rustam, who's a Syrian-American composer from Boston. So it'll be out on the East Coast. And then the other thing I'm super excited about, which we are going to talk about, is this new project I have called Experiments in Play, which is interactive, immersive performance experiences. And I'm taking it to 5 or 6 cities in the spring. It's like my passion project.
Does one of them happen to be Minnesota or the Twin Cities?
Not yet, but
Okay.
I am working on that for a following season.
Yes, come on, Scott. We gotta...
I know, right? Dear Scott Likens.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
But it's Houston, Salt Lake, Denver, Washington, D.C., and then maybe Chicago, Milwaukee.
I had a question about commissioning composers to write for the harp. Because, I mean, I'm a cellist. I have so much repertoire to choose from. And of course, we're still constantly asking composers to write things for us. But one of my questions, is there a deficit in repertoire for the harp? And is it a deficit specifically from people of color or a particular demographic? And is this part of the rationale to have this commissioning project now?
I love all of these questions. And in my other life, my doctoral thesis was going to be about the very interesting relationship between women and the harp, because it has been seen as a feminine instrument for hundreds of years.
Right.
It's the world's oldest instrument. The harp in some form has existed in every single society, but the harp, the one that sits on the floor that you pull back on your shoulder, the Western harp, came into prominence as a salon instrument. It was a domestic sphere instrument. It was considered acceptable to be performed by ladies, and so for a very long time, it was considered an interior domestic instrument. There were a few performers who brought it onto the public stage. Most of them were male. There's Nikolai Boksa was one of them. There was a famous harpist, Dorette Spohr, but she toured with her husband, Louis Spohr, the conductor and violinist, and he wrote all of their music. But it's so fascinating if you look at music composed during the time of the harp in late 1700s, early 1800s, performed overwhelmingly by women. All of the compositions we have are male, except for, like, I could count on one hand, and they're not very good, the ones that are written by women. With the exception of Sophia Dusek. Good job, Dusek. But so we have this very long paradox of women performers, male soloists, male composers. And you see it even now in the fact that before women were allowed in orchestras, they would have female harpists, and they were never shown publicly. They weren't paid equitable principal scales. We are still not paid equitably compared to other principals. And this is a huge thing in the harp world because we finally started counting the number of services we play.
Yeah.
And it's the same as all of the other principals with I think principal second violin tends to play more than principal harp. But we play more or as much as all of the others, and our overscale is significantly lower.
And you guys are so exposed, too. Like, when you play, people always hear the harp, Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It's clearly because it's been gendered for so long.
Oh, that's so annoying.
So that's fascinating.
Sorry.
So anyway, yes,
there's a weird,
there's so many interesting connections between women and the harp, but the harp took so long to figure out how to become a fully chromatic instrument that we just don't have the history of repertoire that other instruments have. We didn't get the full-size concert grand instrument until the beginning of the 20th century, so like 1900s.
Yeah.
So the harp that Mozart wrote his flute and harp concerto for was smaller and didn't have the full chromatic capability.
Right.
And so we have, Beethoven didn't write for us. Brahms didn't write for us in a solo sense.
Right.
All of these amazing composers we missed out on. And so now I've always loved new music. I think it's important to hear the people who are alive with us today. But it's so important that we work with composers of our time to make sure they understand how the harp works and to make sure we're getting living music by people from all different backgrounds and socioeconomic settings and genders, races. Like, now is the time. We should have everybody writing for the harp.
Yeah, and like, as you were saying, it's one of the oldest instruments. So there's something embedded in every culture with this instrument.
Yes.
I've always worried sometimes when it comes to these sorts of things that it's like cultural appropriation or something to like have these cultures write for the Western version of these instruments. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I think not so much now, but every once in a while you'll get a note in a score being like, supposed to sound like the kora, or supposed to sound like this traditional instrument. I'm like, ooh. But I think, actually, in another lifetime, this is something I don't know very much about and I think would be so interesting, is to study non-Western music, because I find it so much less limiting. Just the very little that I know about Hindustani music. It's unbelievable how intense the training is to learn how to play this music and how good your ears are. Like, you can hear scales that we cannot hear. And so every once in a while I'm like, it would be so cool if my harp was not set on fixed, like I can only play notes that I've tuned to or that go up exactly a half step.
Right.
It's like we can't do the sliding thing. But my friend Saad Haddad, who's an amazing composer, we were at Juilliard together, and back then even he was experimenting with detuning certain notes just a little bit so you get more of an interesting scale.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that sort of thing so fascinating.
Yeah.
I remember we had a session where he was like, can you play with, I think you can use those slide things on guitars.
Yeah.
He was like, can you play those on the harp?
Mm-hmm.
And we had a whole session just like exploring those sounds.
Yeah.
So the long and short of it is, yeah, there's like a much larger world out there that I think would be fascinating to explore, but there's only so much we can do with our particular instrument. But it does have a very unique sound, which is, I think they enjoy writing for that sound world.
Yeah.
And I'm the one who's like, I've heard this so much. What about that sound world?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I know that was a kind of a hardball question. I feel like it's a tightrope thing, because I think all the things that we're doing is really important. And I think that we are dealing with the historic nature of where we are today with classical music, and then even then we're struggling to fight for it sometimes. So then it's like just the nuance of it all is like we're all trying our best in the moment.
We really are. I think it's important. My husband's a composer,
mm-hmm.
and so we've talked about this a lot, but it's important to write music that you know and are familiar with, and then it's also important to be curious about music that you don't know so well.
Yeah,
like he's Jewish, and so he knows those like Jewish chants very well. Like that's part of his musical language,
mm-hmm.
which I would be very unfamiliar with, but it weaves into his writing in a very nuanced way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you can explore new languages and you can appreciate them. There is a fine line between exploring that sound and then taking it for your own. It looks black and white on paper, and then most of the time it's not.
Right. Yeah. Thank you again for answering that question, because I know it wasn't the most easy question. it's one
I don't think there's an answer.
Yeah,
like, don't treat other people like crap. Don't steal other people's ideas. Be curious and respectful about things you don't know about.
Exactly. It's the approach that matters.
Be curious. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, is this a good time to take a break?
Oh, yes, that'd be amazing.
Okay, great. We'll be right back. And we're back. So you wanted to talk about the concept of play and playfulness, which I love this a lot, because I also think a lot about, like, for instance, in practice, how to make my practicing as playful as possible rather than a slug. Sludge? Wait, what's the word? A slog.
Slog?
A slog.
Yeah. Oh. I completely agree with you.
Yeah. I guess for me, maybe it was a coping mechanism for my practicing. It was like, okay, how can I make this fun? When do you feel like you started getting more interested in these concepts and things like that?
I will just start by saying I completely agree about practicing. And I don't know, it wasn't told to me like this. I don't know how I picked up on this as I was growing up, but the notion that you had to practice and it was something you had to do has been something I've struggled with my entire career.
Mm-hmm.
And now, as a slightly wiser, older, like I'm not a little kid anymore, it shouldn't be like that. Like, you love the music, and yes, it's work, but it shouldn't feel like a chore.
Right.
Honestly, I feel the same way about homework. I don't know where along the way we were taught that learning something is a chore, but like, I'm sorry, it's such a privilege to be able to learn things.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish maybe that's something you have to learn as you grow up. Now I'm like, dang, I would love to have homework. I miss that learning. Like, these are joys and privileges. But to go back to play, my friend recommended a book several years ago talking about play. And we were having a conversation. I don't even remember what we were talking about, but I was talking about, it's important to be curious and creative. I think I was saying how I missed being in school.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, oh, you should read this book. It talks about how when we're little kids, we're always playing.
Mm-hmm.
First, with imagination, imaginary friends, with each other. Play is built into your school, and so is learning new skills. Like, from the time you're 5 until you leave the education system, you're learning things that you're naturally good at. You're learning things that you're not naturally good at. You are dabbling in sports and theater and drama and music and like so many enriching things for your mind. And then you leave school and you start a job, and we're lucky we do what we love for our living, and it's still work, but it's like very fulfilling work. But once you leave school, you stop having built-in places to be curious and playful. And I've always loved throwing parties, and I've always loved projects.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the pandemic, I started doing woodworking. I taught myself how to do woodworking.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Thank you. I love
Yeah.
it. I just finished built-ins for our family room. But I could feel my brain struggling with new information And as I built this bar cabinet, I felt the process of learning how to do something. And I was like, this is so important. And it was creative. I felt how good it was for my brain. And on the other side of that, at the same time, I like throwing themed parties, murder mystery parties, Harry Potter parties, but I like putting things together, and people always have a great time. And in this book, they're like, hosting parties like that is a form of play. It's your creative outlet.
Yeah.
And so both of these things made me realize that the art of play is something that we don't do as adults, and we really, really should.
Yeah. And
that can be in anything from puzzles, like the New York Times game subscription. I know so many people who do that. That's great. That's a form of play. I also, one other side of it is my family loves games. My immediate family and my extended family. We're all like a massive game people.
I assume board game,
like Taboo, group games.
Yeah.
And so like growing up, we would have family Thanksgiving, and then we'd all play Taboo. Or we'd play spoons, and my grandmother would like claw people as she grabbed spoons.
Yeah, right.
So I grew up with the sense of play. And I realized as I came into my 9-to-5 job, which is its own form of play, I realized that not everybody has those opportunities to experience play. And then I realized that one of the things I love about music is how creative it is for me. And I think sometimes, especially in classical music, the creative side of things gets lost on the audience because we put people in these dark rooms and we tell them to sit there quietly and only clap when you're supposed to, and don't bring in any food or beverage.
Right.
And it's like the opposite of playful.
Yeah.
And so that has really inspired my current passion projects, which is bringing in the art of play into classical music making.
That is an immense undertaking. Like, I think that it's so worthy, and I would like fully supportive of this like vision. And I know that like, at least from my background, like that San Francisco Symphony has tried to do something along those lines. I'm forgetting what it's called right now. Today I'm just forgetting all the names and things, but
yeah, it's like Soundstage or Black Box or maybe it's Soundbox.
I think it's Soundbox. I think you're right. Actually, now that you're saying that, like, does ding 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 a little bit. But yeah, like, so some of these things have already started to happen. Yeah. So like, can you like open up to me and the audience of what your concept and how you're imagining like this whole thing?
And I think it's so much harder with orchestras because it's a very large, unwieldy structure that relies on private donations to function. And so anything you want to do is, it's a very slow process to make it move there. And so one of the things I love is that because it's for chamber and solo for me, so much easier to do. The ideas probably started from my first harp teacher, Mary Kay, who is the most creative person I know. And as a little kid, sometimes I was like, okay, this is pushing me outside of my comfort zone. But every piece I learned had to have a story, and she would make me like connect with the emotions of a piece and the characters of a piece. And as an awkward preteen, you don't want to connect with the emotions of a piece.
No.
But it created the idea of a narrative in music from the time I was little. And this is the woman who designed life-size puppets for a harp ensemble show we did in Dublin, Ireland.
Wow.
She gets bored easily.
Yeah.
And so she was always looking for a connection between music and some other art form. So I had that in my life, like grow from the time I was 5. And then I also love games, as I said. Yeah. So like escape rooms, amazing. Dungeons and Dragons, I should have discovered as a child. I didn't discover until the pandemic. Yeah. But like video games, never did. I played the Nancy Drew computer games as a child. Those were great. But I'd never done like real computer games. Yeah. But all of these like choose your own adventure books, I loved them. And so all of these interests sort of came together in person last year, and I called it Experiments in Play because it really was. I had never done anything like it before. Yeah. And it could have gone horribly wrong, but I built it as an immersive, interactive concert experience that weaves together storytelling and music. The unofficial version is it's an escape room meets Dungeons and Dragons meets Choose Your Own Adventure set to music. Okay. Yep. And so the audience got a program book that I had written that essentially guided them through a narrative world. and you assume the role of a untitled adventurer, and there's a general storyline. You're going in search of a lost artifact. But along the way, you encounter the music of the program. And the music is either based on the imaginary world that you're in at the time, or it gives you puzzles. So, you start your adventure at dusk, and it starts with a Claire Schumann nocturne. And then you get to a fork in the road, and one of the audience members in their program book had a golden ticket.
Okay.
And whoever that was, they got to choose if we went left or right. And then if you go left, it cues a certain scene with a certain piece. And if you go right, it triggers a different scene.
Interesting.
And so back in April, this person chose to go right. So then you ended up in a rose garden, which triggered Florence Price's To a Yellow Rose. And then you found yourself at the start of a giant hedge maze, which featured one of the pieces that I commissioned for Groundworks by Michael Ippolito called Mythos. But it's a retelling of Theseus and the Minotaur. So during the course of this piece, you have to solve the puzzle that's at the front of the labyrinth maze. And it's in the program book. You have to go through a maze, and if you solved the maze correctly, it traced a number.
I see.
So by the time the piece is over, if you've solved it correctly and you choose the correct number, then you can progress.
Yeah.
And then you go to a tower, and another piece that John, my husband, wrote called Music for the Temple, originally inspired by a Guggenheim exhibition, then becomes this imaginary tower where the number of paintings on the wall correspond to a puzzle that you have to solve in your book. But the answer in the puzzle unlocks a door. And so it's that type of thing where sometimes it's just listening and the visuals of what you're imagining are mirrored in the music. Sometimes the music itself creates a puzzle that you have to solve.
Right.
But I made it for people like me who get bored just sitting there listening.
Yeah.
And you don't have to participate, because I have people who don't like games, and I understand that. But if you want to, you can solve all of these puzzles. And so that was the first iteration, and people loved it. They were so excited. People solved the puzzles. It was a stranger who got the golden ticket, and they were like, what do I do? I was like, it's okay. You can choose left or right. It's okay.
That's it.
It was just so much fun.
Yeah.
And so that's the program, because it's just me, that's the program that I'm taking on tour in the spring.
Yeah.
And we're doing them in bookstores for the most part.
Oh, awesome.
Because it's a storytelling experience. And so...
Sorry, I just... that gave me chills. Of course in bookstores. Yes.
Because it's supposed to be...
Yeah.
Yes.
Because sorry to interrupt you, but that was one of my questions was what was the venue, or how was the staging of all of this? Was it a traditional sort of you're facing a massive audience, or was it circular? Was there something more, were people moving as audiences?
That's my ultimate goal.
Yeah.
Is to do... Did you ever hear of Sleep No More in New York?
Mm-mm.
It was in this 7-story warehouse, and it was primarily dancers, but it was loosely the telling of Macbeth. But as audience members, you were given a mask, and then you were sent up an elevator, and you were told to wander. And you just started walking through this multi-story warehouse, and you would come across scenes.
Yeah.
And sometimes the dancers would interact with you. They would do a scene, and then they would go in different directions, and you were supposed to follow whoever you wanted.
So this is kind of like a non-scary haunted house.
Yes,
Okay.
Exactly. And it was definitely creepy at times, but it's just you by yourself wandering around, seeing all of these magical things happen.
Yeah.
And I think it'd be so cool to do this with musicians.
Yeah.
I definitely chose the wrong instrument for that, but if you did more than just harp, you could have people wander into the middle of a rehearsal.
Yeah.
You could have the tiny one-on-one concerts where it's only one person in at a time, and you could structure these around an entire building. So that's the ultimate goal. The first time I did it here, I did it at SMU where I teach, because it was a free venue, and that was nice. The acoustics were nice, but it was really, I would like it to be in a bookstore or a bar type environment where people can have a cocktail and be close and personal. And we actually just did a variation on this, my guitar duo partner and I, called 7 Rooms, which is a murder mystery concert. And this one we did at an old church that's now a performance space, but we set it up like a jazz lounge. So people were sitting at tables. They got to choose their detective team. So you could be a Miss Marple team, a Nancy Drew team, a Sherlock Holmes team, or a Hercule Poirot team. And each team had a clue board. Basically, you went through 7 rooms, and in each room you had a different piece and you had a different puzzle. And as you collected the musical clues, you eventually were able to solve a murder.
Yeah.
And that was really, I really love murder mysteries, so that was like peak enjoyment level for me.
Yeah.
But that one's harder because, I mean, I had all of the props from my library, but to, take it on tour, it would be less prop heavy. But no, this Experiments in Play, I think, is meant for a bookstore type place where it's small, where it's intimate, so you'll feel like you're actually moving with the music and it's not as separate. It shouldn't be separate at all.
Right. This is so fascinating. And I love also in your description of every level of this concert that it's always about like an opening of a door or a beginning of a maze. Like it's always something that is sparking the curiosity of the person, regardless of the music. I think there's something about the way the traditional programming has made it sort of like you must be curious about this because we programmed it. It's like very like we told you to care rather than it being like, no, we are trying to encourage that curiosity side of why, like what is this the start of and where is it going to lead you? If we dissect what play really is engaging those early feelings of curiosity that we lost now as we're adults because we do know too much, Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that's what this podcast is it's like, it's being curious about the people behind the music that we make.
Yeah.
Which is itself a form of play. But yes, that's exactly, I don't know why we stop getting opportunities to be curious about things as we get older. It's almost like people don't like to ask questions because you don't want to be seen as wrong.
Or stupid or like unknowing or something. Yeah. And there's a lot of shaming for being ignorant.
Yes.
Which I understand. There's times where I might have done that myself on accident, shame someone for asking a question. So it's really east to have happen.
Right. And there are questions where you're like, you didn't need to ask that question. Mainly because it was in the email I sent to you 3 days ago.
Right. Per my last email, yes.
yes, exactly. But I've noticed this with like the art of small talk. I feel like people struggle to talk to other people. And I think the pandemic had something to do with that. But you have to work really hard to get people to ask questions and to be curious about things. And to go back to your comment about our classical music format, John and I talk a lot about this because we're both so involved in new music.
Yeah.
But somewhere along the line, probably Boulez, the notion came that new music is ugly.
Right.
And we have to work so hard to dispel that notion. And I'm guilty of it. If I read a piece in a program, I'm like, oh, new music. And then it starts to play and I'm like, that's so beautiful. But you don't know. It's presented in such a non-exploratory format. It can be really tricky. And if you go to any other genre of music making, like a jazz club or anything else, it's fun. People are like happy to be there.
Yeah.
And they talk to each other and they don't know what's being programmed next because there's no physical program.
Right.
And it's just, we've gotten way too stuffy with how we make music.
Yeah.
There is a time and a place for sitting in silence and having a really profound experience. And I think that that's something that we should absolutely keep and treasure, but it doesn't have to be all the time.
Yeah, you have thought through so much of the structure of how to curate a concert that would be none that most people would expect. And like, even as you're taking me through the example of one of your shows, is that it's like every twist and turn was something I wasn't expecting. And I'm like the most concertized, like, I've gone to so many concerts and I love concerts. I love them. It's so intelligent how you've constructed it. And it takes so much effort to be this creative and think like this. Is this something that would be a barrier for other performers to do something similar?
Well, I think you've got to be a puzzle nerd in order to write something like this. And not everybody loves puzzles, and that's okay. We don't need to have everyone writing a musical escape room adventure. I think what it taps into is what I was missing in so many concerts. And it's because I have an overactive imagination and I sometimes find it hard to pay attention for long periods of time. And I know this about myself. So when I'm putting together concerts, this is what I would want to go to. I would be like, I'm there, sign me up.
Yeah.
Because it's real music and it's important music, but it's fun and it gives my brain something to do at the same time. And like, I'll use John for example. He doesn't love puzzles. He puts up with them because of me. Thank you, John. But if he was was putting together a program, it wouldn't look like this, and I don't think it has to.
Yeah.
He now runs the new music series here called Voices of Change,
Mm-hmm.
and their first concert is solar system themed, and its pieces inspired by the solar system and nighttime. But the cool thing that he's doing, he's put together a constellation, he's calling it, of like 7 different pieces, and they're being played one after another, and they're taking place in different parts of the space.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a more serious approach. Like, no one's solving puzzles, but it's interesting. It's
Mm-hmm.
visually stimulating, and it stimulates your brain, and it helps you make connections. And I do think there are people doing incredible things with lighting, with drama, with dance. Like, all of these are other forms of this.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something that we need to do more of.
Well, yeah, and that's why I'm sort of asking it in the sense of it being a barrier, because I think, okay, I'll be critical of our conservatory training. I feel like so much that was at least communicated to me while I was a student in music school was that all you need to do is you need to play at the best and be as technically proficient and, yes, emote, but if you can check all those boxes, you don't have to do any other work. You can just
this is so true.
Yeah.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And then they added in you also have to talk before your piece. Like, I'm sorry. First of all, everyone should be talking at concerts. It is vitally important.
That's what
I don't understand.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
Taylor Swift talks at her concerts. Like,
Yes. People are not going to see the music 90% of the time.
Mhm.
They're going because they know the person.
Yeah.
We're performers. Like, we're entertainers. That's what we do.
Mhm.
With amazing art form, but we're entertainers.
Right.
The idea of putting together a program and not having a theme is, like, unheard of to me.
Yeah.
And no, it doesn't have to be love letters through the ages. Like,
Right, exactly, yeah.
it could be. That
Right.
could be fun. But there needs to be a why to why you're playing things.
Right.
And it could be abstract, it could be philosophical, it could be real, but like, if you don't want to write a whole murder mystery, choose your own adventure, you can at least create a why for why you want to play these 4 pieces. Every piece of art was not made in a vacuum. You know, it's a response to something happening politically, happening in a personal life, happening in a society. Like, the pieces were written because of a why.
Yes.
And I think we're creative people at heart. We sit down with notes on a page and we make them make sense. And so we can take it one step farther and be like, it makes sense to me. Let me explain why it makes sense to you.
No, that is huge to, like, I don't know why you just put it so simply that is what is missing, and what we take for granted, or whatever the elders of our past have taken for granted about programming is, like, we've missed the why. The why was like, well, the music will speak for itself. And to, like, tap into some slight self-promotion here, but I started a new segment on the podcast called Spilling Petit as, like, a pun.
I saw that. I love the graphic, by the way. It's so cute.
Yeah.
With the cat.
Yes, with sushi. Yeah. My first episode was with Jason Wells, who's a bassist, and one of the things that I took away from that conversation heavily was the, like, we need to speak for the music. This whole notion that the music is going to speak for itself, it's not. It's just not. Like, it is on a page. Like, literally, we are the people that are activating it. And therefore, we have to do so and be creative and playful about how we do that. And that's where I'm just, like, trying to understand this paradigm shift of, as I say, the elders of past that say, like, all you need prescribed, like, this is all you need to do in order to be a successful musician. And I feel like our generation, maybe one a little bit older than us too, but, like, certainly going into the new generation, like, this is clearly not how we can keep classical music salvageable, you know, because the world's changed. The world has completely changed. And I'm sorry, I feel very preachy right now, but I'm like, this is huge. Like, what you're doing is salvaging our art form in a way that is palatable, even more so, and speaks to that inner child that we all desperately need to activate on our day-to-day basis.
I really hope so. And you can really see the lack of this in orchestra programming across the board. The theme of a program is Bruckner and Beethoven.
Yeah.
That is not a theme.
That is not. No.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And it might have drawn in people 100 years ago, but it will not draw in people. I would not go to that concert.
Yeah.
Mainly because I don't like Bruckner. But, like, that's not the way to draw in people. And then you create these programs that have no thematic content.
Yeah.
You don't talk to the audience at all. So they're not prepared for Bruckner 7.
Right.
And if you're going to the symphony for a date night, I'm sorry, that's a sucky date night.
Yeah,
if you show up and you're like, what is happening?
Yeah, that's
Even an incredible piece like Mahler 2 is unbelievable. It is profound. It will make you cry.
Yep.
If it's your first time listening to it, you're not going to have any idea of what you're in store for. Like, you need to be prepared.
Right.
And we love all of this music so much because we spend hours with it. Like, we know it intimately.
Yes.
And you're not going to get that on your first listen. Like, really what people should do is go hear these pieces over and over, like we do.
Yeah.
And then you hear something new each time. But you really have to present it from a first-time listener or a second-time listener format and just make it accessible. Like, if you go to a modern art museum or any art museum, there's a blurb explaining what the piece is about. There's an audio guide so you can learn about the history, and then you can sit there and stare at it. They don't just put something on the wall being like, this was written in 1902.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we have these temples and it's just not okay with me. And so I can't, I'm not an artistic executive yet of an orchestra, but like for my own career as Emily Levin Harp, I'm going to make events and things that people want to go to. Yeah. Hopefully, most of the time.
Yeah. No, and I mean, sign me up. Like, how can I help? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you.
I think that that's where, like, this so taps into my identity as a chamber musician, because I feel like that is an area of which we can have this kind of flexibility and experimentation. And it's even more intimate because literally it's like you're face to face with a specific performer versus like an ocean of musicians that are so distant in the second tier of which you're watching this orchestra, which, I mean, I love orchestra. There's like, but
I do too.
Yeah, but it's like there's something even more that you can have in even more intimate interaction with a stranger with that golden ticket.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think this is why people love the planets, because
Holst.
Yeah, it's a guide. He's giving you a guide, and it's a little bit shorter because it's broken down into 8 movements, but each one has a character and has a name, and your imagination goes crazy from there.
Yeah.
And not every piece has to be broken down like that, but it's so helpful because it gives you a map. And then you can go off from there.
I'm like a little bit speechless because I'm just like so filled with ideas and so filled with motivation.
Yeah.
What else do you feel like is the next frontier of you utilizing classical music in this sort of playful programming or in something else? Like, what do you have up your sleeve next?
I feel like they're a little bit my separate passion projects right now. There's Groundworks, which is new music that's fun and wonderful. And then there's Experiments in Play. And I think it'd be really nice to marry them a little bit more. I mean, the pieces that I've commissioned for Groundworks are now on Experiments in Play.
Which is amazing.
And I think that's a great way to show people that new music is not scary, because you get to listen to cool new music and solve a labyrinth puzzle at the same time. But I'm curious as Groundworks continues, because it's still relatively new. This will be the 4th commission. I'm curious to engage more with audiences in the hometowns and sort of dive more into the why of why they're there and what they enjoy and what they dislike. What I've seen so far is that if people know the composer and they love the composer, it could be just like a high B flat for 30 minutes and they'd be like, it was so nice to hear your music. Like, if you love the person, you'll put up with a lot. Yeah. Maybe the long and short of it is just like connecting with people more, which I don't think we do enough of.
Well, and I think that is the primary purpose of play. Like, yes! Like, the reason why we love sitting down with a board game at Thanksgiving or whatever is because you're interacting and learning new behaviors from someone that you might have made assumptions of before. Like grandma grabbing the spoon. Like, where'd that come from, grandma? Right? And I think
it's so true.
That's why we're doing what we're doing rather than sitting in our cubicles and our remote jobs and,
Yeah. You're creating experiences. In a sense, we're event planners, Like, we're creating an experience where hopefully someone is coming and having a good time or being profoundly moved, but the same thing, like they're experiencing something. And yes, I think that's so true. Like, we first learn how to play, we learn how to share and how to be nice to other people and stand up for yourself, but also listen to others. Like, those are very important qualities that you need to keep as you become an adult.
Yeah.
And it's hard. It's really hard not to get stuck as you become older. I think because you do things a certain way and then you're like, well, I'm not going to change.
Right. And they're not going to change, so why should I? Like, all that.
Yeah.
Ugh. Okay. Anyway.
This is not something we should go into because it's totally different, but I've questioned a lot about, like, what is that fine line between, like, knowing what is right and wrong and then having a little bit of grace for other people.
Yeah.
Because I tend to be like, well, that is wrong. But I think that is not always the best way to approach other people. And so I find myself really struggling with, like, how do you show grace to others, but also stand up for what is right?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer to that yet.
Well, that is... that is a huge topic. No, all I know is that we have to learn from each other. If I'm going to try to analyze, like, our society at large today and the pigeonholing of the algorithms of people's thought processes and the confirmation bias that comes from that, and a lot of these things are passive, not in our control, but that's where curating concerts is a neutral ground, or experiencing something that isn't your normal thing. This is like a huge, like, promo for your concerts, experiments and play, because it's like, we're all just coming to have a good time. We're all going to experience something, and at the end of it, it's going to change the way we think. Like, that's what fundamentally art is supposed to be about, and reflective of our time and of history. But we've lost that somewhere in the pursuit of becoming quote-unquote professionals in our work. We lost that. Yes. And I know some people hate the word curator when it comes to music, but there's no better word for it, because that's like what we're doing. We're trying to curate an experience. And I don't know, like, when did we get so complacent?
Yeah, complacent and snobbish, honestly. It can be a hard art form, especially if you have no history in classical music whatsoever. People need to be guided a little bit more through these experiences than what we give them. I do, and I'm a professional musician.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Please tell me about this piece.
Yeah. Do you have any final thoughts or anything that you wanted to share that we didn't touch on yet?
No, I don't think so. At the end of the day, like, we're supposed to make things. We're supposed to inspire creativity. We're supposed to spark things in people. And what a cool calling that we get to do that.
Yeah.
And it's hard and it's exhausting and, like,
it doesn't always work.
Separate.
Too.
Yeah. Actually, the hardest part about these interactive concerts is the amount of energy it takes to do the speaking. I am still working on how to give all of that energy and then perform at the highest level.
Yes.
That's actually my challenge for this upcoming tour.
Us.
I'm like,
we didn't get trained in this.
No, it's exhausting. It's really tiring.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it takes a lot of work, but I'm just very lucky that that's what I get to do.
Yeah. Let us know when you come to the Twin Cities. I would absolutely promote these concerts. Would love to be a part of it in some way. On that note, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. It's always such a friendly reminder that, like, we're fighting the fight. We're trying to fight the fight.
Thank you for having me on a space that showcases musicians as individuals. Like, it's such a, speaking of creative, amazing pursuits, like, this is awesome.
Thank you.
So I'm just so happy I get to be a part of it.
Of course. Anytime. Say bye, Sushi. This episode of Hidden Behind the Music Stand has been edited, engineered, and produced by Patty Ryan. Original music by Patty Ryan. If you enjoyed this podcast or thought that this would benefit someone in your life, please share this episode with your friends and family. Like and subscribe to us wherever you enjoy your podcasts, and follow us on social media at Hidden Music Stand. Email your thoughts and suggestions to our podcast email, hiddenmusicstand@gmail.com. Support the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/hiddenmusicstand.